right, hello. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you for joining me, and thank you, Laura, in particular, for welcoming me into this journey with Boma. It's a pleasure. So today I'm going to start out and talk about something that is, I see as a positive narrative to the future. Not only a positive one, but one that is buildable, one that is starting to get built today. It's a bit to take at once, so I'm going to walk you through the path of what it will look like. I call it Nature 2.0. Let's get going. I'll just start with a challenge. There's a lot of challenges, but self-driving trucks are starting to hit the roads now. In America, there are 3.5 million truck driver jobs. Now, and when self-driving trucks, as they get rolled out, in maybe the next 1 year, maybe 3 years, maybe 10 years, it doesn't matter. That means there will be 3.5 million jobs that disappear. And that's just USA. Of course, we also have trucking here in Germany, and more broadly in Europe, and throughout the globe. Retail. In USA, there are 4.6 million jobs. Right now, there is now Amazon Go stores, which are fully automating those jobs. There's maybe 1 or 2 security guards left, but that's all. 4.6 million jobs in the USA. Of course, there's a whole lot more jobs to be lost when in Germany and so on too, as this gets rolled out. With exponential change, at first it will feel slow, and then it will happen in the blink of an eye. And if you think, oh, well, I'm okay, because I have a creative job, I'm using my brain. Well, I did a PhD in creative AI back in the mid-2000s, and there's a lot of work in creative AI going back decades. For example, this thing here, it looks like a bent paperclip, but it actually is an antenna. And this was actually a friend of mine at NASA Ames, 2 friends, who developed this antenna by evolving it. They got AIs to do survival of the fittest of antennas. And on the heels of this research, they created a company called X5 Systems. And these antennae have been used to, they have flown into spacecraft for more than a decade now. They are key to the spacecraft's functioning. So this is an example of something in the past was thought of as very, very creative work, but now it is done by AI. So in this age of AI, where we see jobs are being taken, and there's different people, that, some people say all the jobs will go, some people say only 10%, but a lot of jobs are going. And there's no law of nature that says for every job taken, there will be another one that comes back. That's a politically correct thing to say, but it's not necessarily reality. So we have to be full eyes forward, understanding that this is happening. So the question is, how do we feed our families? And at the same time, perhaps achieve abundance, achieve self-actualization as individuals and as a civilization? That's a big question. I like to think of it as an engineering challenge. So with that, I'm going to walk you through a series of things that show how we can collect together ideas and technologies to something that might help to address this. I'm going to talk about Nature 1.0, about AI, about blockchain, and then synthesize it into a positive vision of the future. Let's take a tree. It's just there. It takes in nutrients from the soil. It takes in rain. It takes in sun. It uses this as inputs to manufacture wood. It has symbiosis with animals, the flora and fauna around it. And trees are interesting. They have no concept of identity, no concept of ownership, scarcity, no concept of money. They just are, right? They're self-sustaining, and especially as a group of trees, a forest, anti-fragile. If you kick them, they get stronger. Small forest fires are actually good for forests. And of course, we don't stop with just trees. We can go from trees to forests to whole ecosystems. From beasts with the fauna at the lowest level to swarms and herds of beasts to higher and higher levels. And each ecosystem just is. Each ecosystem is self-sustaining, anti-fragile. We can go to the very top level. You've seen this picture already today, and with reason. The largest ecosystem we have is Mother Earth, our planet's ecosystem. And nature has been the cradle of civilization. The wind, the soil, the trees, this is actually what we have built on as humans and humanity. So that's Nature 1.0. Let's talk a bit about AI. There's a lot of definitions for AI. I'm just going to go through a few to show you that I'm not bound to anyone, and it's really useful to look at with different ways. The Gestalt shift idea that the previous speaker talked about. So one of them, going back to Alan Turing, is this idea of simply replicating human cognitive behavior. It's a very useful definition. Another one is, can do tasks that only a human could previously do. Once again, we have the bent paperclip RF antenna. Or doing a task at a speed or accuracy or capacity not possible by humans. Inside your cell phone, you've got about 15 chips. Every single chip has more than 1 billion transistors, even 10 billion or 100 billion now. Every single one of those chips was designed by a team of people, maybe 5 people, maybe 15, over a span of, say, 3 months. It's kind of amazing that you can have a team of 15 people develop a piece of technology with 100 billion moving parts and ship it in a matter of months. How is that possible? AI. And this is actually what powers the semiconductor industry. I know because I spent 2 decades there. That's what paid the bills with me playing with AI. So AI can go beyond the capabilities of humans. Or you can go very mundane. AI is simply a set of tools to do classification, regression, knowledge extraction, optimization, a whole bunch of AI-ish things. Or you can even have embodied agents, the idea of an ant running around and building a model of its world and using that to interact with the environment and to actuate the environment and to keep updating itself. And this is the general idea behind artificial general intelligence, where if you have a smart enough agent that's interacting with the world, then it might even be at the level of humans eventually. So that's AI, a whole bunch of ways to frame. Every single one is valid on its own, and I think collectively it's a stronger picture of AI. Let's talk about blockchain. This is a meme from the world of Bitcoin. Bitcoin has been out for more than 10 years now. So Bitcoin, you can be viewing as simply magic internet money. Fair enough, right? You can use it for value of exchange, you can use it for store of value, and other ways. So you can think of Bitcoin as magic internet money. Or you can be very mundane and simply call it a decentralized database, a bit like Oracle, but with new features, decentralized, immutable assets. Or, like The Economist framed a few years back, it's a trust machine. It's minimizing the trust needed to operate. So it's simply another way to frame, also very useful. Public utility network. We have the waterworks, we have gas works, we have electric grids, we have the air. All of these things are public utilities that we are used to. And now we're starting to see IT-based public utility networks. The most notable one, of course, is the internet itself and the World Wide Web on top of that. Well, with each of the 100 or 1,000 blockchain projects out there, most of those are going to be public utility networks on their own. Ethereum, Bitcoin, all of these. And they each have a unique story to tell. And what's cool is these networks are self-sustaining and anti-fragile. Every time someone tries to hack Bitcoin or Ethereum, it gets fixed and it gets stronger, and that hack is no longer relevant. Bitcoin hasn't had a real issue with security since 2013. And now it's worth more than $100 billion. We can start to get a bit crazier. So we can have self-owning robot plants, and this isn't a definition of blockchain per se, but it starts to show you that you can, these plants, they each have an Ethereum address, and when they get $500 worth of funding sent to them, then they automatically contract out to another artist to create another plant. So here we have 2 plantoids, and they keep growing. They were invented about 4 years ago, and now there's, I believe, dozens of them out there. Maybe in 10 years, we'll have tens of thousands of them will be surrounded by plantoids. But it points to this idea that these plants, this sort of system is self-owning. And one of my favorite definitions of blockchain is life form. This is Ralph Merkle, who's famous not only in the world of cryptography, but also nanotech. Bitcoin is the first example of a new form of life. It lives and breathes on the internet. It lives because it can pay people to keep it alive. It can't be stopped. It can't even be interrupted. If nuclear war destroyed half our planet, it would continue to live. How is that for amazing? This is a technology that is out there today, and it's been out for 10 years. It's changing the planet. It looked slow at first, and now it's doing it rapidly. So those are examples. I've talked about AI, I've talked about blockchain. What happens when you combine them? And there's a whole bunch of beneficial things you can have. My project with Ocean Protocol, we're using blockchain to unlock data for AI. But that's not the focus of my talk today. The focus of my talk today is, how can we go farther? What can this mean in terms of AI and jobs and the future of civilization? So one thing that excites me about the intersection of AI and blockchain is self-owning AIs. What does that mean? Let's unpack it. Consider the following. We've got an AI running on a blockchain. And Ethereum, it's this sort of world computer. So you can have this AI running on top. It generates a new image. And this technology has been around a long time. So on the bottom right there, that's an image generated by genetic programming in the late 90s. Genetic programming is an AI system. So the AI generates a new image. It's doing it on a blockchain. And this AI then sells that image on a marketplace. Maybe it spent $1 worth of compute power to generate it. It sells it on a marketplace, decentralized of course. It sells it for $10. So it's made $9 profit. It takes that $9, what does it do? Let's say 10 for fun. It takes that $10 and it creates another 10 images. It sells each of them for $10 and gets $1,000. Sorry, 100. And then 1,000, and so on and so forth. And before you know it, you have the world's first AI millionaire. Who's owning this? The AI is. It's the smart contract itself running on the blockchain. And this technology is there today as a possibility. An Ethereum smart contract, when it's running and running and running, it doesn't even have its own private key inside. It's just owning those things. So this is a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization that is owning code and making wealth, creating wealth for itself. So DAO, decentralized autonomous organization. Now we're generalizing. It's software that runs autonomously on public utility networks, AKA blockchains, with its own wallet. So it can own stuff. This computational process can own stuff. It's not waiting for the law to catch up, it's just doing it. And we have things like this already out there. And there is legals catching up, but it's not waiting, right? So the idea of a self-owning AI is simply AI software running as DAOs. Simple as that. Technology is there. So let's say, now let's combine these concepts. We had Nature 1.0, AI, blockchain, self-owning AIs. Well, what if we take self-owning AIs to the moon, of course, moonshot on those? What does this look like? I hinted before. We have self-owning robot plants, Plantoids, right? This was a very avant-garde idea when it came out. It's still avant-garde today, right? But this is a possibility, but let's keep going. What about self-driving cars that also own themselves? Self-driving, self-owning cars. I'll be more specific about this. Let's say that Daimler manufactures a car, a whole fleet of them, just like it did for Car2Go. But it manufactures a car. That car itself owns itself, but it's got a lease to buy back itself from Daimler for the next 2 years. The car itself then enters the Uber network, pays itself back over the span of 2 years, and then it basically fully owns itself because it's paid itself off. It's earned income and paid itself off. And of course, even on day one, it owns itself. It just happens to have a debt to Daimler. This is actually possible with technology today. It's not quite easy yet. There's work to be done there, but it's possible. And of course, why stop at cars, right? We can have self-driving, self-owning trucks. We can have self-owning roads, right? It's also public infrastructure. Right now, we are we have governments to help take our income tax and so on, pool it, and then distribute it for public good. Sometimes that works, but sometimes it doesn't, right? But now we can collectively pool our resources towards roads that are owning themselves but have an incentive for public good. Self-owning wind farms, right? And this is interesting too because the energy industry has had real trouble deregulating. Yes, the laws have been deregulated, but what about the energy companies themselves? So what if you say, okay, if we really want to be deregulated, let's let the wind farms own themselves. And of course, the grids too, self-owning power grids. Interestingly, there's a whole other angle for all this. I've talked about human technologies that can own themselves with the help of AI and blockchain, but we can also go the other direction. There's a whole movement out there where rights are being given to natural bodies. The Amazon River in Colombia now has its own rights. It can actually sue people for polluting it. And not only the Amazon, there's bodies of water in New Zealand, there's Lake Erie in USA and Canada and otherwise. They all have legal rights. But right now they need a group of humans to shepherd them to help. But what if in the future they are given AI decision-making capabilities to monitor what they're doing, and they can even accumulate their own wealth? So say you're a self-owning forest. Well, now you can actually allow a bit of logging to accumulate wealth in order to monitor bad behavior. This is starting to get possible. So this is Nature 2.0 from the other direction. Self-owning forests, I talked about that. It's actually a project with some folks here in Berlin. And once again, it can earn resources by logging and so on. So to summarize then, we've got this self-driving, self-owning car. It has no sense of identity, no sense of ownership or scarcity or money. It just is. It's self-sustaining and anti-fragile, especially when you have a swarm. And of course, it goes to ever higher levels of integration, not just the car, but the fleet of cars. Not just a single power generation plant, but a whole grid system, and each ecosystem on its own just is. self-sustaining, anti-fragile. Here's the next trick, and it's the key one going back to the jobs. Imagine if, after 2 years, that car has paid itself off. What's it going to do with the money? Well, guess what? It doesn't care. It's just a car with some AI. It's pretty stupid in the realm of AI, right? Well, let's wire it where it sends that money to basic income, to humans themselves equally. And we don't need to decide what level that is. Instead, we just simply have a blockchain that every time $100 goes into that blockchain, if there's 100 people signed up, each person gets $1. That's it, right? So it's very easy to do distribution on blockchains, distribution of this, right? You can do it globally from day one. But then the question, of course, is how do you fund it? Well, this is what I see, how you fund it. As the robots rise and start to take our resources and our jobs, let's wire them up so that every dollar of surplus money goes back to us as humans. What does this do over time? Well, bit by bit. At first, we might get $1 a month or $10 a month. That won't affect you or me. It'll certainly affect people in rural India and rural Africa, and even rural Saskatchewan, where I come from. I could have used that back in the day. But as time goes on, it will go from $10 a month to 100 and to 1,000 and more, right? As we get to this age of abundance from AI, making things more efficient, this abundance, rather than going to the hands of a very small number of organizations, the Googles and Facebooks of the world, it goes to all of us. With this money, we can use to self-actualize however each of us choose. This is overall what I call Nature 2.0. It's biology and machines in symbiosis, simply providing towards abundance, an upgrade, if you will, to the cradle of civilization. Can we build this? Well, actually, the prerequisite is simply global public utility networks for AI and data. And this is actually where I'm spending my energies now, but not only myself and my team, but also several other projects out there. Ocean Protocol, SingularityNet, Fetch, and more. That's going to level the playing field for AI for everyone. On top of that, it can be used as a platform for these self-owning AIs. Once you take that to scale, that's what you end up with is universal self-actualization income, USI. So to conclude, there's a long-standing joke on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. Well, in Nature 2.0, no one knows you're a forest. In Nature 2.0, no one knows you're a grid. You just are, while you simply provide. Nature is the cradle of civilization. Nature 1.0 is seeds and soil. Nature 2.0 adds silicon and steel, AI times blockchain, towards abundance. And this, my friends, is a positive, buildable vision of the future. Thank you.
Hello. How are you feeling? Still in the comfort zone? Comfort? Uncomfort? Okay. It's great to be here with so many wise people in one room having a Boma. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. There are microphones here, so if you want to chime into the conversation, that's what it's all about, having that conversation between us. We do that several times a year, so we know how to do that, and we'll be happy to have that conversation for and with you, but we want to hear you in that. So, I know you are still Nature 1.0, because I've seen you drink a beer and have a pasta. Before we go into what you just said and what that might mean for us, I would like to understand a little bit more about the configuration of your brain. How did that come about, that you became that Trent that we now heard and know, and to be able to think those thoughts?
That's a great question. I don't know if there's a single answer. I think we're all humans and we just think in particular ways. But you might see that a lot of it is very values driven and about something that we can do together collectively. And this is one of the things that excites me about blockchain. And I've asked myself, like, why am I thinking this way? Why is this a goal? And I realize it goes back to being raised in rural Saskatchewan. So rural Saskatchewan, it's a province in the center of Canada. I like to say it's like Kansas, but 3,000 kilometers colder. And I grew up on a pig farm, right? So I would come home from school and shovel pig manure and all this, and all this, we had grain, of course, too. And it gets super cold. The weather is literally colder than Siberia. So minus 40 in the winter, plus 40 in the summer. And so if you are a farmer and you want to feed yourself and do well, you need to work with others. You need to rely on others because otherwise you will freeze to death. And so in Saskatchewan, going back 100 years, it's always been huge for co-ops, cooperatives. So the biggest and best example is the Saskatchewan Wheat Pool. This is all the farmers of Saskatchewan banded together about 100 years ago to collectively market their grain, to sell their grain, and so on, so that wheat grown in Saskatchewan can be consumed in Japan or wherever. Of course, it's best in Saskatchewan for sustainability reasons, but the point is, this is that. And there's not only a co-op for selling grain, there's one for the local grocery store, there's one for the local bank, et cetera, et cetera. It was Saskatchewan where universal healthcare first came, and it spread to the world. So I think this has been hardwired into me as sort of a natural thing, and I think that helps. And then, just my father bought me a computer when I was small, so I started programming early. So by day I was shoveling pig manure, by night I was hacking computers, and somehow these things merged with these values of trying to make a society that's better for all of us.
Mm-hmm. So I am putting this into my technologist's terms. It feels to me like you were growing up on a version of Unix while everybody was growing up on a version of Windows. So you were growing up in an operating system that was already wired for what is happening now on the technological side. A bit like I heard some of Kevin Kelly's ideas about what technology wants, and the technium being its own species in its own right in your talk. And if I continue with that idea of the operating system, then it feels to me like we are running on an operating system right now. We've built some apps, and we call these apps society and politics and economics and et cetera. And now we can think about shifting into a new operating system. Now, I remember when I did that last time in a larger scale with my technological environment, my personal, I was scared. I didn't know, do I get the same quality of application on that new operating system? Do I get them at all? How much will they cost, etc. So, as a ambassador of this new operating system, what can you tell us about these apps that let's call it democracy, let's call it economics, let's call it the way we live in general. Pick whatever you want to pick.
Right. I think one way to think about it, there's maybe two ways. One of them, just a very quick conceptual way. I do see that we can get to a post-scarcity society if we have abundance, thanks to AI and other technologies. And what that might feel like is Star Trek, like the next generation Star Trek, where Captain Picard and his team, they can explore the cosmos to self-actualize in their own way, and they don't have to worry about feeding themselves. They get food from their replicator. Or Captain Kirk could go and simply, get his motorbike and zoom around. And so they never had to worry about money because they kind of take care of it. So that's a high-level macro. How I see this emerging is there was the slide given by one of the earlier speakers with Maslow's hierarchy, right? Where at the basic level you have food, clothing, shelter, water, and then health and education, all the way up to self-actualization. In sort of a world that is decentralized, imagine that there is, for each one of these needs, say food, et cetera, you have a decentralized network to serve that. So just like Bitcoin at the heart, it's proof of security, in a sense, proof of doing these transactions in this way. Well, what about proof of food? Proof that food was consumed by a human. Proof of move of person for mobility, et cetera, et cetera. And so we can, maybe there will only be 15 networks, maybe another, periphery of 100,000 networks around. But at the heart, for this OS, I see these different networks that really act as infrastructure for civilization. And we're not there yet, right? We have pieces of it, and we're building on the existing internet. But instead of thinking of it as a stack in an IT sense, we should think of it as a stack in terms of Maslow's hierarchy.
Okay, meaning that we have to start at the bottom to get things right, or is that just a way to structure things?
That's the way to structure things. I think it's really useful to work at things in the bottom, but there's a lot of value. I think about more than 10 years ago, Bill Gates, who I admire like crazy, he said, why are we trying to sell, sell computers to people in rural India when we don't even have sanitation figured out, et cetera. And I totally empathize with that. But at the same time, if these people have some form of IT technology, they can figure out where's the water. Maybe they only have to walk half as far to go get water and to inoculate themselves with disease and whatnot, right? So that might feel like it's technology that's a higher level, but certain technologies can actually help to meet the basic needs, right? So, and it's useful to explore, having people get benefits in the first world, but making sure that they trickle down very quickly to everyone else, right? Such that everyone has an equal opportunity to self-actualize. That's really the goal, right?
Well, currently, part of what people would argue is a good thing about the system is that we have a very clear reward system. So people go out and use a GDP-backed fiat currency system that we use to run the world in order to accumulate a lot of money and then buy a Ferrari to show that they have that. Yeah. What would happen in such a world? Yeah. So what would happen in a world where there is no such money, there's no scarcity, there's abundance? Do we need Ferraris?
Obviously, we don't need Ferraris. We never needed Ferraris. I love Ferraris personally, too. But overall, the KPI for civilization right now is money. But that's because, if you go back 50 years, 500 years, it was correlated with survival, right? But if we get to a point where we don't have to worry as much about our basic needs and even higher level things, then what is the KPI? And I've asked myself this question often, and what I keep arriving at is the KPI for civilization is every single person on the planet has the opportunity for self-actualization, right? So you can even cast, if you're an AI person, you can cast this as an objective function, right? Maximize the percentage of people that are self-actualizing. But if you get 3% here and 0% for the rest, that's terrible. So you really want it to be weighted where you have each level like, okay, what's the percentage here and here and here, and weight it up such that overall you have positive upwards progress, such that eventually in 20 years or 200 years, then everyone's at the 100% point for self-actualization, right? But that to me is the KPI we should aim for. And as previous speakers talked about, having the KPI where it is about GDP and economic growth and money, that's causing real problems to society. Greatest example is climate. That is a global commons for everyone, but we have exactly the tragedy of the commons, where it's I get benefit by hurting the commons, by taking from it, but I'm not getting called on it, right? So we need global solutions for that, and there's the government approaches, which I think it's nice to see movement there, but we can take actions ourselves as citizens, knowing that blockchains themselves are global from day one, and they are incentive machines. You can get people to do stuff with them, and that is a complementary tool.
So if I translate it into my language, if we change the backing system for a currency, because GDP is the core driver for externalization of cost, into something like a Happy Planet Index, we would immediately start seeing shifts. Now that's not really feasible in a political environment of the world today, but what is imaginable is, and the way I understand your work is that you're working on this, is that we start creating small islands of thinking like this, creating token systems that incentivize people to do things that are good for the planet and humanity at large.
Yes, so you can be small islands in a vertical sense or in a horizontal sense, right? And then either grow it like this or grow it up. I think there's the desire for audience participation too. So
yes.
There's the catch box.
Thank you. Cool. So we have the catch box, but we've had some wonderful questions coming through on Slido.
Okay.
So I'm just going to check some of these Slido questions at you. So the first one comes from Thomas, and the question is, why would Daimler sell cars? Shouldn't they operate the fleet themselves and capture all of that surplus for themselves?
Absolutely, and that is a wonderful question. I have asked that many times myself. And this is exactly what they've done with Car2Go in the past, and other organizations too. It makes sense, right? The cool thing is, I have a few answers. I fully admit none of them are 100% satisfactory, but this is what I see. One way is Daimler cares a lot about quarterly results, about shareholders and all this in the next quarter, in the next 1 year, in the next 2 years. It cares less about 5 years or 10 years, and if it did, then its shareholders would revolt, right? So let's hijack capitalism for the planet. So So a friend of mine, he rolled out the lottery system in the USA, right? He invented the scratch lottery ticket, rolled it out. He went to individual states and said, sign here, you'll get $50 million a year, right? And in the deal, it was where his company got about a quarter of the proceeds, right? But they all signed because it was free money, right? So I would love to just go and work with the big corporations where there's sort of free money in the near term for these capitalist organizations, but in a way where 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, we have emerged in a whole new realm for everyone. So that's one solution, hijack capitalism. The other one is simply working with governments that help to see this vision to help ensure that it is something that is sustainable for all of us, rather than simply Daimler capturing all the profits 10 years out and so on, right? And I'm not trying to pick on Daimler. I think it's a very well-run company in many ways and whatnot. So it's just an example.
Awesome. Another question we had from Arjun: how can managing the legal and criminal liability of a self-owning entity be navigated?
That's a great question. In fact, you don't even need the self-owning part. You can just go to self-driving, right? And this has been a big question for many, many countries over the last number of years, countries and jurisdictions. And in Estonia, there was a group of folks working on this where they're like, okay, how do we, if a car crashes into people, who's liable? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the designer? Is it the person riding the car, et cetera? And what they arrived at was, let's give rights to the car itself. Why? Because it was actually the best way to thread the needle for rights and responsibilities. And approximately the set of rights they were looking at giving was the same level as a wild animal, right? So, if it really acts badly, you put it down, right? And that's pretty interesting that it's there. And if you think about it, we already have robots that are out there that have rights. Unfortunately, their KPI is the bottom line. These organizations are called corporations, right? We invented them centuries ago. We still have them, and now they're causing all these sorts of problems. But if we actually have it where the incentives of these new self-owning entities are wired towards self-actualization of civilization, then we can do a lot better.
Awesome. And just one last question, because I'm the time police also, so I'm just flagging. We only have 3 minutes left. You mentioned in your talk, you framed the idea that what if the KPI for AI should be the self-actualization of every human on the planet, and you've talked about how we can hijack capitalism so that self-owning cars, for example, can be generating surplus that go to every human on the planet. Matt has asked, what if productive working is a good route to self-actualization for every human on the planet?
Absolutely, great, perfect, right? In fact, we're already seeing trends with that right now, where jobs that are being taken by robots, some humans are figuring out how to do it cheaper, acting as humans, right? So this is going to be a gradual thing. It's going to feel gradual, and then it won't, and the exponential will kick in. But for sure, this isn't all jobs going away tomorrow. I just want to make sure that as the jobs disappear, that the wealth created from those jobs goes to all of us, and not just a very small number of pockets.
So I want to build on that point a little bit, because if you combine a decentralized network with AI, it becomes uncontrollable by definition. So is it possible that the work that we will be doing in the future, the productive work that we'll be doing in the future, is having conversations like this and then feeding that back into the AIs in order to help them make sense, to help us self-actualize?
Absolutely. And my favorite example is Nature 1.0, right? Nature 1.0 isn't 100% benevolent, right? It's mostly benevolent. We eat from it, we breathe the air, all of this from the commons that it's providing. But we do get hurricanes and floods and earthquakes that kill a bunch of people at once, right? So nature can be cruel. And I expect that, if we truly want to get to a Nature 2.0 that is mostly benevolent, and we can wire it as much as we can, there will be times that it will hiccup and it will be cruel and there will be, big complaints and stuff. But it's hopefully it's going to be smallish in the grand scheme of things, just like Nature 1.0 is usually smallish. Not always though, right? We had an ice age that almost wiped out humanity too. So hopefully though, with Nature 2.0, we'll do it in a way with a lot of discussion and thought and consideration. And this is what we're talking about. This is why I come to places like this to help iron out the kinks and to talk about how it's actually a gradual thing, right? But I see it as a way where we can rewire incentives for society that leverages capitalism, that takes us to a future that we can all benefit from.
There's a question about the time frame.
Yeah.
There's a certain sense of urgency. The first Mark this morning talked about that. What's your idea and feeling about the time frame of getting this done in the way you envision it?
Yeah, so overall, I see, Noah Yuval Harari laid out in his 21 Questions book 2 major sort of critical issues in the near term, right? One of them is climate crisis. One of them is AI taking jobs, right? So AI taking jobs, this is clearly a solution. In the last 6 months, I've thought a lot more about how can ideas or tools like Nature 2.0 and AI and blockchain really help the climate crisis. And I do see that there are possibilities. I mean, I didn't emphasize it that much here, but the slide that I had with the Amazon, where it already has rights, and this is a global movement of more and more people working on this. Imagine if every single natural body on the planet had rights and also had an ability to accumulate wealth and an ability to sue automatically all this, right? Then nature itself, Nature 1.0, will push back on all the shit that we're pulling and maybe help save the planet.
Wow. For me, that's a great ending. Is there anyone out there who wants to build on this? Microphone. There's a microphone here. Hans? Back there, yes.
Hi there.
Great.
There we go.
Yeah.
Perhaps this is obvious, everyone knows it. You talk about self-actualization, if I even said it right. And you said 100%. So is this a quantifiable thing? What does it mean?
That's a great question, right? What self-actualization means is different for every single person. So, maybe for some people it means creating art or creating great novels. Maybe for other people it means helping the elderly. Maybe for other people it means playing video games in their mother's basement. And we can't judge. That's the definition of universal, right? It's really, really critical that we don't judge, and instead we let people, choose their own fates as long as they're not harming others and society, right? So that's how I see self-actualization. Being able to pursue your dreams without worrying about cost or feeding your family and all of this.
We're out of time.
There was,
We're out
maybe
of
one
time.
more? Out of time?
Sorry,
Okay.
sorry.
Out of time, I'm sorry. Okay, I hope you had a good time with Trent. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you.